Hello. So, a Prince of France and a King of Scotland meet outside a castle in 1216. This isn't the beginning of a joke. This is a tale of unexpected royals. Welcome to Kentish Tales and Tales of Kent, mythology, folklore and history of this great county. This tale starts with King John. Not many people have a good word to say about King John. Now, kind of how history works is that historians piece together lots of things they find from the past, whether it be like diaries or chronicles or bits of archaeology, to try and put their interpretation about what they think happened. When it comes to King John, the best that can be said about him was he was okay at being a bit of an administrator. On the other hand, other people have said he had many affairs with the wives of noblemen.
C'est vrai.
He might well have killed his own nephew, who had rebelled against him, so maybe that's okay.
I thought the man was dead.
He managed to annoy the Pope so much that he excommunicated him, meaning he was not allowed to attend church or receive confession.
So, you go to the Pope and you tell him, if his Archbishop puts one foot in England, I'll cut his goddamn head off!
He starved to death the wife and son of his former friend. Matthew of Paris, no, not that one, said of him, he always took money from his people and destroyed their property. He hated his wife and she him. He gave orders that her lovers were to be throttled on her bed. He managed to go from owning these bits of France to losing a whole series of battles to owning this. Whilst doing this, he managed to also tax everyone loads.
Taxes! Beautiful, lovely taxes!
Including the barons. And frankly, they'd had enough of him, and they marched on London and seized it.
And what sort of news do you have? Not bad news, is it? You know I can't take bad news. The day started out so good.
It was clear that they needed some kind of meeting to clear the air. So what happened was they all met up at Runnymede near Windsor. And they agreed what's called the Great Charter, or as we know it today, Magna Carta, which agreed certain principles as to how a king should behave. These were, you're not allowed to imprison people illegally, and you had to put people on trial relatively swiftly. Also, church rights were protected, and it put some limits on what a king could tax people. And then everyone lived in peace and harmony? Not really. Nobody trusts John, so the barons didn't give up London like they promised. And also the Pope, who at this point was on John's side, declared that this whole thing about telling kings what to do was wrong. So he said that the Magna Carta was null and void. Soon it turned into all-out war, with King John on one side and the barons on the other. It looked as if King John was getting the upper hand, so the barons turned to somebody they thought could help them out. They needed their own king. Where could they get one from? Over the water in France. They turned to the Dauphin, Prince Louis, and asked him if he wouldn't mind becoming King of England. Louis landed on the 21st of May, 1216, on the Isle of Thanet at Stoner. In actual fact, he landed, then fell flat on his face into the sea, but he got up, put his lance into the beach, and declared he would be the next King of England. King John came down to look at the proceedings, and decided the best thing to do would be to scarper. From here, Louis went to Canterbury, which basically opened their doors to him. Rochester, which had been the site of a long and bloody siege where King John had wrestled the control from the rebel barons, which is definitely another tale for another time, fell to Louis in a week. By the 2nd of June, Louis was in London in St Paul's Cathedral and declared king, although no one went so far as to put a crown on his head, so becoming in a sense King Louis I of England. After that he took Winchester, which was England's second most important city. At this stage, Louis and the rebel barons controlled a third of England. There was one place Louis hadn't taken, and that was Dover. Matthew Paris, no, not that one, declared that it was the key to the Kingdom of England, and it would certainly make Louis's life a lot easier for transporting goods and men across the Channel. Louis arrived in Dover and proceeded to don his armour and parade in front of the castle, looking rather resplendent. He demanded that the castle should surrender forthwith. Unfortunately for him, the man in charge was a de Burgh.
Lady in red.
Not that de Burgh, although weirdly they are related. Instead, this was Hubert de Burgh, and Hubert was having none of it. He had over 100 knights from England and from Belgium, and lots of men-at-arms, as well as a keep stock full of food. He was going nowhere. At one stage, one of Louis's men, a renowned crossbowman, got far too close to the side of the castle, and somebody nipped outside a door and dragged him inside. Louis was disgusted, and he ordered that if he was to capture this said fortification, he would hang everyone else inside. And he constructed a siege tower to bombard the people inside the castle. He ordered his men to start digging tunnels to undermine the towers and the walls of the castle.
Not sure what it is yet, but when we take it back and clean it up, we're not even sure what metal it is. It looks like iron, but it could be anything.
Yeah. But it's the first find of the day, so
Still could get a French knight then.
yeah.
Yes.
At this point, the King of Scotland turned up, Alexander II. He'd sauntered all the way down from the borders of Scotland, right through England, and went to Canterbury, where Louis met him, and the two moved their way down to the castle. In front of the castle walls, Alexander paid homage to Louis, declaring him the new King of England. It must have been quite confusing for the people in the castle. The miners managed to complete their works, and one of the towers came crashing down. At this point, Louis's army surged into the gap. As Anonymous of Bethune described, those inside pushed them back with great vigour, and then closed up the places where the walls were broken with great timbers, crossbeams, and large trunks of oak. Louis realised he was getting nowhere very slowly, so he decided to strike a truce with the inhabitants of the castle and moved on. It was then that he heard the excellent news that King John had died. Some people said he'd been poisoned by a monk who'd taken juices from a toad and mixed them in John's wine. Others said that perhaps it was because the king had eaten too many peaches. More likely it was probably dysentery. John's heir was a 9-year-old boy called Henry. Louis returned to Dover Castle and demanded of Hubert that he give up, and announced that he was the king. I mean, how could he support a 9-year-old child? However, this was misguided, and Hubert, even though Louis offered him the highest advisor position in the land, refused to surrender. Louis was suffering on another front, as a band of loyalist, royalist archers had come together under the leadership of one William of Cassingham, or as he was known at the time, William of Weald, or as he was nicknamed, Willykins. These people attacked Louis's forces, disrupted his supplies, and generally caused a hell of a lot of havoc for Louis. William of the Weald and his men hid out in the forests and would sneak out and attack Louis's forces. It's possible this was the inspiration for Robin Hood, but this is a tale for another day. I sometimes wonder how this hasn't been made into a film. Louis tried to keep up the pressure. He brought in more siege equipment and attacked Dover Castle again. He even brought in a trebuchet, the first time one of these had been seen in England. His was called Bad Neighbour, or Malvoisin. However, he wasn't having much luck, as William of the Weald once again attacked and burnt down most of his siege equipment. The war was not going well for Louis. Many of the rebel barons had gone on to the royalist side, supporting the young Henry III, and being led by the mighty legendary knight William Marshal. A large part of Louis's armies had been wiped out in the Battle of Lincoln. Things got much worse for Louis when a fleet bringing over supplies for his men in England was sunk. 2 battles were fought at Dover and at Sandwich, where Hubert de Burgh had sailed out and sunk the enemy fleet. The enemy fleet was commanded by Eustace, who was apparently a mad monk who had fought for the English, had become a pirate, and had dabbled in necromancy and black magic. Louis would come to terms with Henry III and William Marshal at the Treaty of Lambeth, where there was an amnesty on all the baronial rebels, and Louis was paid 10,000 marks and declared he would leave England and that he never was the legitimate King of England. Louis would go on to fight many other battles and would die of dysentery and become a forgotten King of England. If you've enjoyed this tale, then you can click below and find a reading list on my website. Perhaps you'd like to follow me on Facebook or Twitter. Or if you're interested in a time period, or person, or place, or theme I haven't covered, then pop it in the comments below. Stay tuned for more Kentish tales and tales of Kent.